Okay, so today is October 5th, and this is our Greek Studies live meeting. Open to all students, so whether you're just getting started or you're already a few lessons in, I hope to make it helpful for everyone. It's not intended to be a replacement for the online courses, so keep your focus on the online courses, get tasks done, get assignments completed, and we'll use these live meetings really just as a way to improve your understanding of the lessons, make the lessons a little more enjoyable and informative. You can ask questions and things like that. So I want these live meetings to be helpful for everybody, and I want them to be an opportunity for us to get into these studies a little more broadly or deeply than we can in a written lesson. Okay, so doesn't matter where you're at. If you find something that I talk about to be too difficult, like if you're just getting started and I get off, on a topic and you have no idea what I'm talking about anymore, just let me know. Sometimes I can assume that what I'm talking about, you all know about, because I take a lot of this stuff for granted, and I don't mean to do that. So just let me know if there's something that I say that you don't understand or I haven't explained before. Just let me know. While I'm talking, it's hard for me, especially when I'm sharing my screen, it's hard for me to see the chat. So if I'm sharing my screen, don't bother chatting me questions because I really can't see them. Once in a while, I'll stop and check, but just follow me when I'm talking and sharing my screen, and then when I get done, we have plenty of time to chat and things like that. So just bear with me. What I'd like to do today, I have to make sure I keep checking for new students coming in, but what I'd like to do today is just go over Greek reading a little bit more so I can make sure that everyone is learning how to read the actual letters and words. So we'll practice that a little bit. Those of you who already are comfortable with that, you can help us a little bit. So it's not a waste of time for you to be here. And then for most of the class time, I'd like to look at a Greek vocabulary lesson, which none of you have seen yet, because I don't have it published yet. But I'd like to at least introduce you to it so we can start learning some Greek vocabulary and get to work on that. All right, so as far as Greek reading goes, let me share my screen. Any questions quickly before I share my screen? Anything you'd like to ask before I switch over to my screen share, which makes it hard for me to see the chat? Any questions real quick? You can say no if you don't have any questions. No. Good. Okay, so let's go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started here. All right, so our first challenge, the first goal we have is to learn the alphabet and get started reading the Greek. Now, I'm not going to teach all of this in detail because I've already made videos available that you can study and study and study on your own. And it explains every single letter, every single mark, every single sound. So if you have to learn how to read the language, I recommend you study those videos privately. Okay, I've gone through every detail and I think it's pretty effective. So assuming that you've already done that or you're going to do that, so if you haven't done it yet, it's okay. But if you're going to do that or have already done that, we can then start working on this together and just pay attention, learn as much as you can. It'll help. A lot of this stuff is actually easy. There's usually only a few letters that you struggle with. A lot of them look like the English letters and they're pronounced like the English letters, so they're not that difficult. But there's just a few unique Greek letters or letters that are confusing. I'll point out a couple confusing ones, okay? So some letters to pay attention to because they can be confusing. In this first word, we've got this consonant nu, and it looks like a V. So when you're getting started with Greek, you have to remind yourself that the letter that looks like a V is not a V. It's actually like the English letter N. So you've got to make sure you learn the letter nu. That's the name for that letter. It looks like a V in English, but it's actually more like an N. So that's one that causes some trouble. The other one is the letter rho, because it looks like a P, right? So you've got to remember that the Greek letter that looks like a P is not a P. It's actually like an R. So that's another one that causes some trouble. Other than that, I'm not sure that there's much more that's difficult. Let me see if there's any other one that's difficult. Make sure you know that this symbol at the end of a word is a sigma. It's pronounced like an S. And it's the same letter. Let me see if I find another one here. One in the, see this letter here? It's the same letter as that there. Those are both sigmas. They're pronounced like S. So just make sure you remember that sigma has two different forms. Other than that, I think things are quite simple. Just a couple letters to watch out for. Make sure you learn this as the gamma. That's like the English letter G. Always pronounced hard like God, never pronounced like George. But other than that, there's not too much to cause trouble, and it just takes some time to get used to. One other thing that's complicated, which is not even in this lesson. It's that the zeta and the xi, the two letters zeta and xi, sometimes delta, you can get those confused when you're just getting started. But other than that, it's really not that complicated, all right? So what I'd like to do is just walk through these words so everyone can practice and just get more comfortable with the letters and reading and hear the sounds. So what I'm going to do is just walk through these words. I'm going to highlight a word. And when I highlight the word, what I want you to do is just think of how you would read that word. Okay, think of how you would read that word. I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. And then I'm going to read it so you can hear it and you can test yourself, all right? That allows everybody to get some practice. So beginning with verse 1 here, here's our first word. Think about how you would pronounce that. Don't chat or text, don't write anything, just think about it. How would you read that first word? Think about what the letters are. Maybe you can name the letters. If you can't yet, that's okay, just relax. You can learn that on the videos, but think about how you would read that first word. That word is made with the epsilon and nu, and it's read N, which again is pretty simple, unless you forget that that letter that looks like a V is like the English N. So this word is N. Then we have our second word here. So take a look at that. Think about how you would read that. Think about how you would read that word. And then I'll tell you, it's spelled alpha, rho, chi, and eta with a iota subscript, a little iota written under that eta. And we'll study all this stuff in detail, so don't worry about it. This is read arche, arche, arche. That little iota is not pronounced, so you can just ignore it when you're reading. And notice that accent mark over the eta means that we go up and down with accent on that last syllable. Arche, arche. Next, we've got a word that looks like the first word, but is a little different. Think of how you'd pronounce that. Look at the symbols. Think about what those symbols mean. If you don't know what those symbols mean, feel free to ask. But I'll explain them in a minute here. So this third word, we have the letter eta, which is a vowel. Eta, which is like a long epsilon. So it makes the sound e, it's long. And then we've got that letter nu, the consonant nu. So this is pronounced ein, ein, ein. We go up and down on that syllable, ein, because of that accent mark, that tilde. So we've got en, arche, ein. En, arche, ein. Next, we've got this short word here. Think about how you'd read that if you know. Think about how you'd read that. We've got the letter omicron. That's the vowel omicron, which means small o. And we've got this mark above it that looks like an apostrophe, but it's facing the direction of the letter C. That's a rough breathing mark. So we add the letter H in front of that vowel, and we read it as ho, ho. So we've got en, arche, ein, ho, and then we've got this word. So check that out. Think about how you'd read that. In this word, we've got the letter lambda at the beginning, lambda, which is like the English letter L. Then we've got the Omicron again with an acute accent, which tells us to rise or accent that syllable. So we've got lambda, Omicron, then we've got the consonant gamma, gamma, which makes the G sound. We've then got another Omicron here. And then we've got the sigma in the form that comes at the end of words. So final sigma. And this word would be read as logos, logos, logos. So we've got en, arche, ein, ho, logos. En, arche, ein, ho, logos. Now here's a challenge for you in the chat real quick. I'll take a look in the chat. Transliterate that for me. Type that into English letters. En arche ein hologos. En arche ein hologos. Transliterate that. En arche, and you've got to get it perfect. Don't be sloppy. En arche ein hologos. En arche ein hologos. Good, George. Who went first there? Henry, George. Sorry, George left out one word. Giovanni. Yeah, that's okay. Henry left out a letter. Luke looks good. James looks good. Cecilia left out a letter, but pretty good. Adel and Anarche looks good. Okay, good, George. That's right. And Anarche, very good. Cecilia. Okay, so that all looks good. Basil, that looks good. All right, so good. Let's keep going here. Next word. Next word. Think of how you'd read that word. I didn't ask you to transliterate it. I asked you to think of how you read it. Okay, so in this word, we see the Greek letter kappa, kappa, and then we've got the vowel alpha, and we've got iota. Kappa, alpha, iota. What's important about these two vowels, alpha and iota? What's important about those two vowels if you've studied some grammar? What's important about those two vowels? James Bates. Victor says diphthongs, Giovanni diphthong. Yeah, diphthong. Okay, so those two vowels make a diphthong, and that's important because that tells us that this, even though there are two vowels, this is a one-syllable word, and it's read kai, kai, as one syllable, okay? Then we've got this phrase again. We've already read it once. Diphthong, yep. All right, then we've got this phrase again. We've already read this. Think about how you would read that. It's ho logos. Then we've got this word again, which is a verb. We've already read that back here, so we're repeating that. Think of how you'd read that. It's the verb ein, ein, ein. And then here we've got a new word. So think about how you'd read that word. Think about, if you already know how to read it, think about the names of the letters. Imagine if you had to explain as much information as you could about that word based on what you see, okay? We see the first letter here is the letter P or pi. In English, it's commonly called pi, but it's really pronounced P. So we have P, then we have the consonant Ro. We then have Omicron with a grav accent. Grav means it's lower. Okay, grav means lower, and you can just look at the direction of the accent. Some grammar books will tell you that you should just ignore the grav accent, but that really doesn't make any sense because we don't use symbols for nothing unless we're writing in English where we just get a kick out of using silent letters, just to torment ourselves. But in Greek, they don't use meaningless symbols. So what a grav accent mark is usually you've got sort of a baseline for how you read the Greek sentence, and then you actually will come down a little bit with the grav accent, All right. And then we've got the final sigma here. Okay, so we've got Pi, Rho, Omicron, Sigma, and that's read as pros, pros. And you can hear how I just take a little bit of stress off it there, pros, pros. So we've got Kai, Ho, Logos, Ein, pros, and then we've got this word here. Think of how to read that one. Think of how to read that word. We've got the consonant tau, which is like the English T. We've got another Omicron with a grave accent. It looks like, just so you know, that accent is spelled like grave, but it's pronounced grave. So a grave accent, and then at the end, we've got the consonant nu, which is pronounced like the English N. So this is read as ton, ton, ton. All right, think about this next word. Think about this next word here. Letter we haven't seen yet in this verse. The first letter is, who can tell me the name of that letter in the chat? I'll keep you guys on your toes. Yeah, I asked for the name of the letter, theta, very good. All right, so theta, it's pronounced like TH. Now, in the grammar lesson, if you want to be a perfect nerd about this, it's actually pronounced like TH in Thomas, okay? But nobody does that. Nobody, if you take a Greek class in a college or you listen to people read Greek, you'll never hear anybody read it like that because we've all become accustomed to reading it as TH as in theology, right? But it's so that's the theta. Perfectly, it will be pronounced as like Thomas, okay? But normally it's pronounced like TH in theology. Then we've got the epsilon. We've got the epsilon. And just so you know, this is the lowercase form. This is the lowercase epsilon. And back here, we saw the uppercase epsilon. So those are the same letters. So that makes the sound of short epsilon. Then we've got the omicron with an acute accent. So it's going to rise up on that syllable. And lastly, we've got the Greek consonant nu. Now, what's special about these two vowels, epsilon and omicron? What's special about the vowels epsilon, omicron? What's special about the vowels epsilon, omicron? And you're all wrong because you fell for my trick question. There's nothing special about them. They're not a diphthong. Very good, James. Okay, it's not a diphthong. So this is actually read as two separate syllables. That's why it's important to memorize which vowels make diphthongs. The vowels alpha and iota make a diphthong, and that word is one syllable. But this word here, these vowels, epsilon and omicron, are not a diphthong. So they're two separate syllables. So we don't have theon in one crazy, one syllable. We have theon, theon. All right? Two syllables. So this phrase here, kai hologos ein pros ton theon. Go ahead and transliterate that for me. Transliterate that for me. Be careful, huh? Some of you like go, fast and then spell half the words wrong. Looks like me typing. Just take your time. I'll wait for you. Okay. Kai hologos ein pros ton theon. Kai hologos ein pros ton theon. That looks pretty good. And just so you know, when you do the assignments to submit these transliterations, I think everything looks good so far. When you do these assignments and submit them, I think there's some more instructions like you can mark eta and omega by underlining those vowels, right? So just make sure you read those instructions when you do the assignment. We can be a little more accurate than we can in a Zoom chat room, but this is good for now. All right, so that all looks good. Kai hologos en pros ton theon. Good. All right, so now if we keep reading here, we come across the same words again. So we've got kai again, we've got theos again. Well, theos for the first time, but we've already seen that word theon. We've got ein again, and we've got hologos. So that brings us to the end of verse 1. And we've gone over that before. That's probably not too difficult. Yeah, theon means God. It's the same thing as deum in Latin. Now, let me just say this about linguistics. Linguistics is language study. So what, you might wonder, and follow me here. You might wonder, how do we even know, right? How do we even know how these letters are pronounced? Well, one of the ways we can figure it out is by looking at how different languages connect. Follow me here. Stop writing on the chat room. If you think about the Latin word Deus, think about the sound at the beginning of that word, de, right? That's obviously derived from Greek. It's derived from Greek, and that's a proof. That would be an argument that the Greek theta was not pronounced like theology, but more like Thomas, right? Because it has a hard sound when it's taken into Greek. So linguists look at different languages and they look at how one language affects another, and they sort of use that to reason to figure out what ancient languages might have sounded like. So that's what linguists do. If any of you want to grow up and become linguists, believe it or not, you can make a living studying languages. All right, so that's verse 1. Let's go to verse 2. We've got this first word here, which is a real doozy. Some of these words are difficult when you're getting started because a lot is happening at once in a word with grammar. So think about how you would read this word. Think about how you'd read it. Pay attention to all the different symbols and letters. Think of how you would read it. Try to be exact. So we see all kind of stuff here. Now, let me ask you a question. This is sort of a challenge question. Chill out in the chat. I want you to pay attention to the lesson. You can chat all day with each other if you want to. Look at this, and here's a challenging question. We know that breathing marks are placed over the first vowel in a word. When the word starts with a vowel, the breathing mark is placed over that vowel. But if we look at this word, we have the breathing mark is placed over the second vowel. Why is the breathing mark placed over the second vowel? Who can answer that for me? If you can't answer it, relax, because you're going to learn. Why is the breathing mark placed over the second vowel? Yeah, very good. You guys are on it because it's a diphthong. So it's treated like one vowel, okay? So omicron and upsilon here, omicron, upsilon are two vowels, but they make a diphthong. So they're treated like one vowel sound. And then the breathing mark is actually put over the second vowel, which again shows us that it's a diphthong. All right, and then we've got the accent mark there as well. Now, this is kind of weird because in Greek, we pronounce this diphthong as oo. Now, it's not ohutos. I'll type it. It's actually pronounced as hutos, hutos, hutos. Okay? So that diphthong, omicron, upsilon, is pronounced as oo. Ooh, and it's got rough breathing, so it's hu, hutos, hutos. All right, so there's a lot going on there. And when you're getting started with Greek, don't distract Giovanni, or I'm going to take you out of the chat room. When you get started with Greek, sometimes you run into a word like this where there's actually like 3 or 4 different grammar lessons all going on at the same time, and you've got to put them all together. So words like that can be difficult. All right, so hutos, hutos. Make sure you get all of that. Then we've got the verb ein again. We've seen that a couple times. Then we've got en again. We saw that before. We saw that's the same as this first word here. En, it's just an uppercase because it's the first word of a sentence, but that's the same word. We've seen arche before. And we've seen pros, we've seen ton, and we've seen theon. So that's all just repetition. So in verse 2, we've got just one new word, hutos. What does hutos mean? What does hutos mean? It means this. Very good, George. Okay, so this. What is it referring to in the translation? This is for the students who've already read this. What's it referring to? It's a pronoun. It means this. What's it referring to? Don't guess, think. It says this. What's it referring to? No. Yeah, George is right. It's the word. Okay, logos. Okay, so verse 1, we've got enarche ein hologos, kai hologos ein proston theon, kai theos ein hologos. And then in verse 2, we've got hutos ein en arche proston theon. All right, so you can test yourself. If you can follow me there, that's reading at normal speed. If you can follow me, you're doing pretty well. If that's too fast for you, you just have to take your time and keep studying the pronunciation. Let's do this. Who can translate this phrase for me? Just type the translation. Enarche ein hologos. Enarche ein hologos. You can type a translation. It doesn't matter if you're the first one. If you're a little slower, you can still do it. I'll wait. Enarche ein hologos. Enarche ein hologos. Good. In the beginning was the word. Then take this second phrase here. Kai hologos ein proston theon. Kai hologos ein proston theon. Translate that for me. Translate it for me. Not transliterate. Let's translate. Translate that. Kai hologos ein proston theon. And the word was with God. Okay, good. And then this last phrase of verse 1, kai theos ein hologos. Kai theos ein hologos. And God was the word. Cecilia entered that there. Kai theos ein hologos. All right. Now, if you look in an English Bible, and I think I talked about this in Latin reading at some point, but if you look in an English Bible, you'll see that that's not translated, and God was the word. It's translated, and the word was God. Now, why in our English translation are the nouns flipped around? Why does it say, and the word was God, when the Greek says, and God was the word? Anybody want to take a guess at that? Why does the English translation say, and the word was God, when we can see in the Greek, it says, and God was the word? Sounds better. It makes more sense, yeah, but why? Why does it make more sense? Shows that God is more important? No. Why is it flipped around in English? We talked about this. When did we talk about this? Yesterday in Latin studies, we talked about this. Why would English flip things around and change words around? No. You see, I caught you. I caught you weak on grammar. The reason why is because in English, when we write sentences, we put the subject before the verb. We put the subject first. The subject of this sentence is hologos. Okay, the subject is hologos. So in the Greek, we see kai theos ein hologos. And when we see it translated into English, the English translators say, hold on a minute, the subject is logos, so we're going to put that first because that's proper English word order. Okay, so that's why. So the Greek actually says kai theos ein hologos, but in English, we put hologos first because that's just how English works. Okay, so that's that. Not like there's some conspiracy theory and the translators are trying to lead us into heresy. You know, it's that's how English works, okay? Verse 2 here, who can translate this? Hutos ein enarche proston theon. Hutos ein enarche proston theon. Hutos ein enarche proston theon. This was in the beginning with God. Very good. Hutos, this, ein, was, enarche, in the beginning, proston theon. Now notice how wacky this gets in translation. We learn that in Greek, we have definite articles which we translate as the, right? So we know that we translate the definite articles as the, but sometimes we don't translate them. Other times we have a word like arche here, which does not have a definite article, and we add the when we translate it into English. So you see that the translators, when we translate, there are decisions that have to be made, right? There are decisions in translation that have to be made. And this is really important because when people say things like, we don't need to listen to church authority, we don't need the church to tell us what the Bible means because we can go study the original languages for ourselves. That's not true, because to translate the original languages, you have to make decisions that are based on interpretation, and you don't have authority to do that. See, so when people say things like that, you can see that here we translate the definite article with the. Here we have no definite article and we add the word the. So you can see that decisions and interpretation is being done when the languages are being translated. And the controversies always bring us back to interpretation. So don't ever let anyone tell you that, you don't need authority to guide interpretation or anything like that. We can just go read no, it's not true. You're just going to come back to questions of interpretation, and you're back to the beginning of the argument. So when people appeal to languages, the languages are not going to solve the problems. Church authority solves the problems. The Holy Spirit given to the church solves the problems. Not going back to the languages. We still have to make translation, interpretation decisions, okay? All right, so that's verse 2. So far, so good. Verse 3. We'll do one more and then we'll take a quick look at vocabulary. All right, verse 3. Let's look at this first word. Think of how you would read that. Think of the letters, the sounds they make, and how you would read that. This word starts with the letter P or pi, makes the sound of an English letter P. Then we have an alpha with an acute accent, so we're going to stress that first syllable. Then we've got the consonant nu, which is like an N. We've got the letter tau, and it ends with alpha. So we read this as panta, panta, panta. Then we've got this word here. Think about how you would read that. Also try to think about what in the world that thing is. Think about what that is. Think about what that is. We can see the letter delta at the beginning of this word. That's a delta, similar to an English D. And then we've got a iota, which is like an English I. So we've got delta, iota, and then we've got this symbol here. Who can tell me what that is? Anybody know what that symbol is? And if you're typing breathing mark, you're wrong. So don't continue typing that. You're wrong. If you say breathing mark, you're wrong. George says in place of an alpha. Victor asks me, accent. I'm asking you for the answer there. You're asking me a question. Nope, 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 nope. All right, this is a different symbol. So pay attention here. You'll see that this looks just like the soft breathing mark, but there's no vowel under it. So something wacky is going on, right? That's a regular apostrophe, just like in English. It's an apostrophe. And the reason why it's put there, why do we use apostrophes in English? Who can tell me why we use apostrophes in English? Why do we use an apostrophe in English? To replace vowels, yeah, even more generally. Well, you say possession, but that's just because we're using an apostrophe as to mark a form that shows possession. Yeah, why are we doing that? What do we do with that apostrophe? What does the apostrophe do in English? What does it symbolize? Come on, give me a good answer. You're sort of scratching around the answer, but you haven't got it yet. What does the apostrophe signify in English? It all comes back to grammar. Boring old grammar. Yeah, shortened word, it replaces a vowel. Okay, you're saying it replaces a vowel. But look at the word can't. What does the apostrophe signify in the word can't? Okay, so not just a vowel, but also a consonant. So just be simple. It represents letters that are removed from a word. Okay. The apostrophe marks that letters have been removed from a word. So here we have a word with an apostrophe that tells us that a letter has been removed, and that letter, as some of you might have mentioned, is an alpha. This word is actually dia, dia. But with the apostrophe, we read it as D. Now, who can tell me why? Who can tell me why St. John, assuming that this is the exact, writing and spelling of his original Greek, who can tell me why that alpha in dia would be dropped? Who can tell me why? Yeah, James, very good. James got it. Because the next word, Adel got it, very good. The next word starts with an alpha, very good. Okay, the next word starts with a vowel, very good. So dia autu would be kind of clumsy speech. What do we call it when we make changes to language so that it sounds better? What do we call that? This is an example of it. There's no reason for it except that it sounds better. It's easier to say. Very good, James. Some of you should know that. We study it in English composition. We learn it in Greek grammar. If you're getting started with Greek grammar, it's euphony. What does euphony mean? What is that word euphony? Just so you know, James, it's spelled with an O, not an A. What does euphony mean? Means it sounds nice, sounds nice. James is having some trouble today with his spelling. Euphony means it sounds good, right? It reads well. So when this was written, they didn't want to add another syllable there, so they eliminated one syllable by dropping the vowel and marking it with an apostrophe. All right. Now, that's a lot of information, but I just want you to see what's going on there. And it's just euphony. Okay. It's not a mystery. There's a reason for it, and the reason is very simple. Sounds better. So we have panta, and then we read this as D, and then we've got this next word here. We're going to stop after this word and go look at some vocab. So let's try one more word. Why is the breathing mark on this second vowel? Oh, you're blaming your computer. Why is the breathing mark on the second vowel? Because it's a diphthong. Very good. So alpha upsilon forms a diphthong. The breathing mark is set over that second vowel to show us it's a diphthong. Now, when you read this, when you read this with this apostrophe in there, you should treat it like it's one word. Okay, so don't say like D and then stop and then say autu. Say diautu, diautu. Read it as one word. Okay, that's how it's meant to be read. So panta diautu, panta diautu. We're going to stop there only because I want to spend a few minutes on vocabulary. Okay, so we're just going to stop there. We'll pick up next week. We'll just start there. And I know, some of you may be further along. You might think this is boring, but as an experienced teacher, one thing that I know is that you don't know it all. So as you can see, when I ask you questions, you might say, oh, come on, man, this is so easy. Well, then get the questions right? If I'm asking questions and you're getting them wrong, you're just proving me right that we do need to be careful and go through these things. And I want to make sure that you really understand the details. So just humble yourself and be patient. We ain't know-it-alls. That's true. Okay. So even though I know it's tempting to want to rush and get ahead, if we just take our time and even from the first few verses, learn these details and really pay attention and get to the point where you can answer all these questions correctly, it's just going to make everything else easier. Okay. So good. So I know you don't know all these things. I know you want to try to rush ahead to pretend you're so smart, but you don't know. There's a lot of information packed into these first few verses, and I just want to make sure you're paying attention to it. So we'll go slow. On your own, in the lessons in the online courses, you can go ahead as fast as you can, but I'm going to make sure we get all the details, okay? So that's that. Now, I said I want to talk about some vocab. I want to share a book that I'm going to be using to make a Greek vocabulary course available. Obviously, this is going to be optional for you. This vocabulary book is helpful because because it shows us 3 languages. We've got English on the left, and if you find this hard to read, just relax. You're not going to have to read this book, so just relax. This book is hard for me to read, so don't worry about that. But you see 3 columns. It's not Orbis Pictu, so don't try to get ahead of me, okay? This is a different book. We see English on the left, we see Latin in the center, and then we see Greek on the right, okay? So it's especially useful for students who are studying both Latin and Greek, because remember, just because you can look up a Latin word in a dictionary and it happens to have an English meaning, that doesn't mean it's the right word, okay? It doesn't mean it's the right word. So it's helpful for us to study it like this, because we can learn the Latin word that is equivalent to the Greek word, and we can keep those words together and know that they mean the same thing. They're synonyms. So there may be another word for sun, or there may be another word for star. You'll find sometimes there's more than one word, but this Greek word aligns with this Latin word, and it's important for us to know that, okay? So this is important. Let me ask you a quick question. Can you guys hear birds in the background of my microphone? Can you hear these crows out here? Yeah, I'm sorry. I've got my window open and there's like a crow conference out here. So hopefully it's not too loud. All right. So now I want you to know on the right-hand side here, we've got these Greek words, and not only is Greek difficult to read, but the old schoolmasters and publishers, when they printed Greek books, they made it even more difficult because they used symbols for different combinations of words. So it makes it even more difficult. Now, I'm not going to give you this book to study because I don't want you to have to try to figure out these symbols. Yeah, I've had crickets in the background of videos before too. If you ever watch the Petty School videos, I did them late at night, and you can sometimes hear all kinds of stuff in the background. That's just real life. But let's focus on the Greek here. What the old publishers did was they used symbols for different combinations of Greek letters, so it's even more difficult to read. So what I want to do here is I don't want to get wrapped up in the symbols. You're not going to have to read them. And just so you know, I had to figure this stuff out by myself. So I don't want you to have to go through the self-torture that I did to figure this stuff out. But I want to just read through some of these vocabulary words so you can start thinking about Greek vocabulary. And then I'm going to retype all of this in nice, clean lessons so you don't have to deal with this crazy symbolism. Okay, so what we see here, the first word in English is the sky. Now, if I asked you what is the Latin word for sky, here's the problem. Some of you would say, oh, I know that, it's caelum. You see, and then when you look over here in the column for Latin, you see, oh, actually, they don't use caelum here because that's not the proper use for caelum. And that's the kind of problem that I'm warning you about. That's why when I criticize teachers who say, like, we're going to learn Latin by speaking Latin, that's the kind of stuff they do. And it's not real Latin. All right. So we've got to be more careful than that. We see the sky here. The sky, if we're looking up at the sky, and it's not referred to as caelum, okay? It's referred to as aether or aether, okay? Aether. And then if we look over to the Greek, and again, this is very difficult for you to read, but we find that that's the Greek word. It's aether, aether, okay? You see the alpha, we got this big alpha at the beginning, then we've got the iota, which makes a diphthong. So we've got I, and then this wacky symbol here is actually a theta. And then we've got an eta and a rho. So it's aether, okay? And you can see that in Latin, they just grabbed that word from Greek and used it. It's almost the same exact word. So how do we know that theta is equivalent to th? Look at Latin. There it is. All right. So we can see that the Romans show us that theta in Greek was equivalent to Latin th. That's how we know. That's what linguists do. So we've got aether, that's the nominative case form, if you look it up in a dictionary, and then this tells us the genitive ending. So it would be aetheros, okay? But what I want you, just focus on the vocabulary, aether, okay? Now, let's think about English vocabulary, all right? Aether, in English, we have an adjective, ethereal, and I'll write it here in the chat. We have a word in English, it's an adjective, ethereal. If I say something is ethereal, what does that mean? Take an intelligent guess about what ethereal means. Of the sky, right? What if I say this song is ethereal? What does that mean? What do you think it means? Heavenly, I don't know if you guys spend any time just sort of like laying on the ground, staring at the clouds, and they're just like floating around and everything is so peaceful. That kind of peaceful, cloudy, floating, sunshiny spirit, we refer to that as ethereal. Okay, so if something is, you can say heavenly, but we don't mean like dark outer space. We don't mean negative 90 degrees on planet Mars. We mean this sort of warm, breezy, sunny, cloud floating spirit. Okay, that's ethereal. So I want you to focus on the derivation of English words from these Greek words. Okay, so we've got aether. And if you were to transliterate it, you'd almost get the Latin word, but not exactly. The second word here, we see the uppercase alpha, and then there's this symbol that looks like a sigma, but that's a symbol that represents sigma and tau together. So it's like ST. And then we've got eta and rho. So we've got the word aster, and I'll type it here so it's clear. Aster. And we see that's the Greek word for star, which in Latin is stella. Stella is star in Latin. Aster, yeah, so as soon as I say that, you're going to be able to start thinking of English words that are derived from aster, right? George wrote asteroid. Give me some more. You can think of some more. Think of some English words derived from aster. Aster means star. Think astronaut. Very good. Think of some more. I'm asking you to think of some words derived from the Greek word aster, not the Latin word. Astronomy, astrology, good. Okay. Asteroid, astronaut. The word astronaut is pretty funny because the word nautes in Greek, naute, yeah, astronomics, good, same word. All right. Naute means a sailor. So an astronaut is like a star sailor, a person who sails to the stars. Yeah. Okay, so we've got the word aster. That's the Greek word for star. Then we've got another word. We've got alpha. We've got that symbol that marks the sigma and the tau. So ast. And then we've got rho, omicron, nu. So we've got astron, astron. And that means constellation. So astron is the name for constellation. We see in Latin it's Sidus, astron in Greek. And this little symbol that looks like I don't know, it looks like a bull's head. It's got like a circle with two horns coming off it. That symbol is for the diphthong omicron upsilon. And it tells us that the genitive form is astru, astru. okay? Now that's a lot of detail, and you guys getting started, you don't need to understand all this stuff. I'm just telling you what it is. Astron, constellation. Next, we've got comet in English. We've got Kappa, Omicron, Mu. Then we've got Eta, Tau, Eta, Sigma. Cometes, cometes. And so we can see that's almost exactly transliterated into Latin, cometa, and that's where our word comet comes from the Greek cometes, cometes, cometu, okay, comet. Next, we've got planet in English, and if we look over at the Greek, we've got pi, lambda, alpha, nu, eta, tau, eta, sigma. It just says planetes, planetes, that's the Greek word, planetes. Now, what I want you to see here is if you know how to transliterate these words, go ahead and transliterate planetes for me. Transliterate it. Planetes, very good, very good, very good. Now, look how easy the vocabulary is, right? If you just know how to transliterate the Greek letters, the vocabulary is easy, very good. Okay? Doesn't take a genius to figure out what that word means if you can transliterate. Okay? So good, planetes. That's good. Next up, we've got the planet Saturn, Saturn. And when we look over into the Greek, we have kappa, rho, omicron, nu, and then we've got this wacky symbol here. It looks like a G with a circle around it. I think one of you mentioned that before. That symbol represents omicron sigma, omicron sigma. So this word is chronos, chronos. Real quickly, transliterate that. Good, James. Chronos. Chronos. Now, let me ask you this. Can you I don't want you to think of derivatives because it's a little more confusing. You might think chronology, but that's not true, okay? Chronos is the Greek name for Saturn. The god that the Romans called Saturn. All right, next we've got Jupiter in Latin. We know it's Jupiter in Latin, but if we look at Greek, we see Zeus, Zeus, and you've got this wacky symbol, which is a symbol of epsilon, upsilon, Zeus. So we've got Zeus. But the genitive form of Zeus is Dios. Dios. The genitive form of Zeus is Dios, and that's where our word Deus comes from. It's just the name used to refer to Zeus. Zeus is his name, but Dios is actually the noun that's used to refer to God. Okay, Dios. And then we've got a couple more. We've got the planet Mars, which is named after the god Mars. We see the Latin Mars, but in Greek, it's not Mars. Who can transliterate that? I think it's clear enough to read that one. Who can transliterate that? Ares, very good. Ares, you can see alpha, rho, eta, sigma. Okay. Then we've got the sun, and this is the last one we're going to do here. We've got the sun here. Notice it's rough breathing, even though it's hard to read. It's rough breathing. Who can transliterate that word? See if you can remember what that symbol stands for. What's that word there? It's the Greek word for sun. Greek word for sun. Who can transliterate that? That's a challenging one. But give it a try. I'll only laugh at you for a few minutes if you're wrong. No, nope. There's no. Giovanni got that one. Very good, Giovanni. That first, you look at, now this is very confusing. Okay, this is very confusing because when you look at the Greek, it looks like a letter H. And then when you look over at what Giovanni wrote, we see that he started with a letter H. But that H that Giovanni wrote is not a transliteration of this letter, is it? Giovanni, where did you get that H from? Where did you get that H from? You didn't get it from this letter. That's not H. Where'd you get the H from? Not the accent. Not quite. That's not the accent, Mark. What's that called? Not the accent. Nope. You guys are throwing handfuls of rocks here. Aspiration, very good, Victor. Okay, you got that. That H came from the breathing mark at the beginning of the word over here. This letter that looks like an H is not an H. What letter is this? This is pretty confusing. What letter is that? That's the eta. Very good. That's an uppercase eta. So that's really a challenging one to transliterate. Okay, the rough breathing mark becomes H. The uppercase eta, which looks like an H, actually becomes an E. And then the rest of this word, we've got lambda, iota, and then the symbol for Omicron sigma, which again, Giovanni got it right. I'll type it here. The Greek word helios, that's the name for the sun, helios. Now, think of some English words that are derived from helios. Not too difficult, right? Helios. Hell, maybe, I'm not sure about that. Helium, probably. Who can think of a bigger word? Heliocentric, very good. So heliocentric, what does heliocentric mean? All right, Luke, thank you for coming. What do you think heliocentric means? Sun-centered, right? It means heliocentric. So if your idea of the universe is that the sun is in the center, it's called heliocentric, sun-centered. All right. So anyway, you'll get used to this. It took me a lot of time to get used to this. Now, and let me just tell you, when I started, I was a college student when I decided I wanted to restore classical liberal arts. I had to do all this on my own. So I found these old books and I would open them up and I would look at them and I would say, I have no idea what in the world this thing even says. And I had to slowly figure out what these different symbols mean and things like that. So, for me, it was kind of like a fun puzzle. Where did I find them? In college, in my library. One of the benefits of going to a good college is they've got really great libraries with tons of old books. So I had to figure this out. I'm hoping to make this a lot easier for you guys so you can pick up sort of where I've left off after a million years and you can just get into this and take it forward. But that's what we need to do for this vocabulary course. And that's why transliteration is so important. That's why retyping this stuff is so important. There are so many old books, really good old books that modern students wouldn't even be able to read, and we've got to get them into fresh print. So there's a lot of work to be done. All right, it's 2:00. I don't want to introduce anything new, so anyone who needs to leave, since it's 2:00, you're free to go. You don't have to worry about missing anything. But for those of you who want to hang out, if you've got any questions or anything you'd like to talk about, feel free to fire away on chat. You're welcome. These classes are fun for me too. I don't really know that there's anything called Jupicentric, Giovanni. Unless you're proposing some new theory. I've never heard that. You're welcome, Adel. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Victor. Thanks for coming. So we'll do this kind of thing in future lessons. We'll do some reading and then we'll work on some vocab. Now, let me say this about this, like heliocentric, lunocentric. You're welcome, Bryce. Thank you for coming. I'm glad that you were able to get in and get that worked out. Sounds like you have been duped into believing this. When you're talking to a group of people and you use the pronoun you, and then when there's a million possible topics and you use the pronoun this, there's no way for anyone to know what you're talking about. So that's not very good communication. Let me say something about this talk about theories about the universe. We know that in the ancient world, just listen for a minute, George. I want to talk about this for a minute. There's nothing to fight about with these theories of the universe. In the ancient world, it was very common. Most philosophers were geocentric. They believed that the Earth was at the center of the universe, and they explained all of the apparent motion of the sun and stars and planets as moving around the Earth. And then later on, you probably know that Galileo and Copernicus and other scientists, astronomers, argued that that was wrong and that the sun is at the center of the universe. And then it became cool to follow the scientists as usual. Just follow me here. This is important. In the 1500s, astronomers argued that the sun is the center. And then it became cool to follow the heliocentrists and argue that the sun is the center. And that was popular until the 1900s. And then Albert Einstein came along. And Albert Einstein wrote a book titled The Evolution of Physics. Pay attention, Giovanni. Albert Einstein wrote a book titled The Evolution of Physics, and he explained in that book that both the geocentric model and the heliocentric model are true, because what matters is you have to pick a point of reference as your starting point. And if you pick the Earth, you have the geocentric model, and you can work to explain all motion with reference to that starting point, that point of reference. And if you pick the sun, you can do the same thing. You can say, okay, we're gonna make the sun our center of reference and describe all motion with reference to the sun. They're both true. So that's why I say there's no need to argue about that. Most people who argue about that really don't think about it. We start with a center, we start with a reference point, and then define all movement with respect to that reference point. They're both true. You can use anything. You could use yourself, right? You could use your eyeball. There would have to be some way to prove what's called absolute motion, right? Relative motion means that we start with a point of reference and we describe motion with respect to that point of reference. That's called relative motion. Like if I'm standing on the side of the road and a car goes past and it looks to me like the car moved from left to right, that's relative to where I'm standing. But if I'm sitting in the car, the person sitting in the car looking out the window saw me move in the opposite direction. That's relative motion. Neither one of us is wrong. There's just two different points of reference. So there's nothing to argue about. Now, if you decide you want to be a physicist or astronomer and get into like scholarly research, it's smarter for you to talk in terms of heliocentrism, only because if you're doing mathematical calculations and things like that, it can make those calculations simpler, or so they say. And if you work with professional physicists and astronomers, they're going to assume the sun at the center, and you would do the same just because it's convenient. But to say that one of them is true, one of them is false, you'd have to demonstrate what's called absolute motion. And I'm not sure how you'd do that. Okay? So don't fight with people over that. There's actually no controversy there. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. You could do the same thing with the moon. The problem is that if you choose different reference points, some are better than others because they make calculations and movements more complicated. You can argue, maybe you can argue that the Earth is the center, but some will say that makes the movements more complicated. And I don't know. But it's relative motion we're talking about. That's what Einstein explained. And if you're curious, if you're a book reader and you want to read a good book that's pretty easy to read, I recommend Evolution of Physics by Einstein. It's meant for like ordinary people. It's a paperback book. Good to read. It's funny because what a lot of people say when they're arguing for modern science, their ideas aren't even what modern scientists believe. Any other topics, questions, issues you'd like to talk about here while we're on? If not, I'm going to run away. In transliteration, when I see the diphthong, Omicron upsilon, do I transliterate it? Ooh, yeah, that's difficult. I think it would probably be best to use OU, right? Probably be best. But you've got to make that mental note to say, oh yeah, I remember that, that needs to be pronounced like ooh, right? So I think it would be better to do it OU, but you just got to remember how to pronounce it. Good question. Anything else here? Henry and George, you guys getting along in Greek studies? Where are you guys at? James, you're on lesson 8 or 9 in reading, right? Yeah, good. Lesson 1 alter. Yeah, okay, so you're getting started. Good. Yeah, take your time. Take your time. Make sure you get a strong foundation. If you try to rush ahead, you miss the details and you'll end up getting confused, especially when we start learning forms and grammar. You really need to know the details. So just be patient. It's not hard. It's not hard. And George, your name is a Greek name. Have any idea what your name George means? I know you're probably named after St. George, but you know what the name George actually means in Greek? Nope. Well, that's a good assignment for you. Figure out what your name means in Greek. Virgil actually wrote a book, wrote a poem, and the title of it is Georgics. Georgics. You know, it's not pronounced George in Greek, it's George. You can figure out what that means. Yeah, something to do with earth, definitely. Uh-huh. I'll tell you, it means farmer. The name George means farmer. Georgics of Virgil is farm poetry, poetry about life out in the country. That's what George means. All right, any other questions before we wrap up here? I don't think we're going to have a 1 o'clock meeting tomorrow, but I will be available for office hours if anybody has any questions before the weekend. Henry, I was going to do Theophrastus, but on my planner it said to study lesson 4, but do the assessment for lesson 3. What are you on? You're on lesson 4? What lesson are you on? Did you already do lesson 3? Yeah, you need to go work on the farm. I sure could use it. If you ever want to be a farmer, you're welcome to go build yourself a hut out on the farm and you can work on the farm. Is there class on Monday, Columbus Day? What do you have, like an all-day vigil that you keep in your family for Columbus Day? No? Yeah, I don't think we yeah, I don't have like a my family doesn't have a Columbus Day liturgy that we keep. Lesson 3. So just whatever, Henry, just finish lesson 3. Maybe the lesson 4 note was just going forward. Yeah, we'll have class Monday. That's what, sacred scripture? I think sacred scripture study overrides Columbus Day ceremony. I don't think Columbus is more important than scripture study. So Monday, yeah, I'll plan on having class. It's just an hour. we can get right back to our Columbus worship after after we're finished. Yeah, obviously for the Owens, they're not. I guess they might honor Columbus. Yeah. I've always been curious to know what English people think about American history. All right, so let's wrap up for today. Office hours will be available tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern, if you got any questions. And then we'll plan on class Monday. So that's all for today. I hope that was helpful. We'll keep working on the courses. Make sure you're getting actual assignments and tasks done. Otherwise, you're just spinning tires in the mud. You got to move forward on this stuff. So get assignments done, get tasks done. That's real progress. Okay. And I'll catch you guys next week. Take care.